Welcome into another live edition of the Future Sox Roundup. My name is Elijah Evans, and I am joined by Jeff Cohen as we are here to talk all about our trip and me being here, joining Jeff in Charlotte and Kannapolis. We talked about Charlotte on the episode that we recorded a few days ago, and today we are going to dive all into the Kannapolis Cannonballers. Single A Kannapolis is an overhaul squad right now. I mean, they have really changed a lot. We were able to talk to 10 players probably yesterday, in addition to manager Pat Leland, to really get a whole scope of everything going down in Single A right now. What was your initial kind of takeaways from our whole day spent in Kannapolis, Jeff?
Well, I'll tell you, the big takeaway I had was this is a really revitalized offense. They lost a lot of pieces, and you could tell they lost Connor and Galaney, and of course, most recently Nishida, and it was just that much tougher for them to score runs. But that's changed in a big way. They've got some big time college bats, and they scored 6 runs last night, including 2 off a top 100 pitcher.
Yeah, 100%. No, I mean it's a lot of new guys there and a lot of experienced guys there. We talked to the majority of the draft class, the 2024 guys that are there already. We're going to talk to a few more of them in the coming days here, but it's a really revamped offense, and I think we're going to see a pretty revamped pitching staff in the next week or two. It sounds like they're going to be getting a handful of the 2024 draft picks on the pitching side of things sooner than later. So it's pretty exciting to see kind of the change in Kannapolis and just see a team that is, they know they're in the playoffs, right? The way minor league baseball works, they've already clinched a playoff spot and a spot in the Single A, Carolina League Championship by winning the first half of the season. So even though they've struggled a little bit in July and picked it up a little more recently, right? They already know they're going to be hosting a playoff game come about less than a month from now in September. So it's just an exciting feeling there with a team that's young, but also has a bunch of these new guys to the system that are just ready to attack and get after things. And it's cool to hear. We talked to Pat Leland yesterday for a while. We were able to catch up with the manager of the Cannonballers who, he kind of talked about how it's like they know there's something to work for, right? August can be a little slow sometimes. There's some dog days, but they know they've got a playoff series in less than a month from now, which makes it that much more exciting to watch them right now.
Yeah, and Pat said, you want to go into the playoffs hot. You want to have some momentum. So that's the goal for the next 3 weeks of the regular season is to develop a cohesive group.
Yeah, 100%. Let's start on the pitching side of things, and then we'll dive into all of these college hitters and hitters that have already been there because we got to talk to a ton of hitters yesterday. But Jake Peppers was a starting pitcher yesterday. This is a 9th rounder in last year's draft, in the 2023 draft. Peppers is a guy that, we had seen some life from him and some stuff from him early in the season. He kind of fell a little bit below the radar just because, Grant Taylor was there for a little bit. Guys like Aldrin Batista was dominating in Kannapolis for most of the season, right? Seth Keener was there early in the year who's dealing with an injury now. But Peppers is a guy that, 5 starts now since the All-Star break. Some of them cut off by rain, albeit less than 2 or less runs allowed in all 5 of his post All-Star game starts, Jeff. And this is a guy who, we saw front hand. We were on video, we were right there behind the plate. Ian Eskridge got a pretty funny picture of us sitting right there behind the plate, sniped me taking a picture. But, we were sitting there watching Pepper stuff last night. And after the first inning, he was a little shaky early on. The command wasn't quite there. He settled in really nicely and had another really solid start yesterday.
Yeah, you're right. He was an afterthought, really, at the start of the season. He was low man on the totem pole. You mentioned a couple guys who got bumped up, but there was also Tommy Vale, Bokenstadt.
Yeah.
I mean, he was the number 6 starter in that rotation, and man, he's proven otherwise. I saw those 2 rained out starts, and he looked great in both of those. So I was really anxious to see this one and see, if he could continue it into the 4th, 5th innings, and it's great stuff.
Yeah.
He talked about how he's just a different pitcher since he had the 10-day break at the All-Star break. It gave him a chance to rest and kind of tweak some things, and it's made a huge difference.
Yeah, you can check all the videos from Peppers. We did a full interview with him after the game at ElijahEV8 and at AAA Jeff on X. We both posted videos from that interview. Peppers also talked about how he switched his slider a little bit, which is pretty interesting to me because this is a guy who has a lot of natural run on his fastball, right? He was getting up in velo yesterday too, 95, 96 with a 2-seamer, right? That has some natural movement to it. So when you've got a fastball that has some ride on it at already at 95 miles an hour, right? You got to have a breaking ball that can play off it with some sharpness, right? His slider, he talked about how he used to do more of a cut slider that was a little bit less downward movement, a little bit more of a sharper cut. Now he's kind of changed his grip a little bit and is trying to lean in to that full kind of depthy slider with a little more break to it. And it looked good yesterday. I mean, especially those last few innings of his start, his slider was snapping off really well. He was locating it better than I feel like he was early in the season. And he was really able to get a lot of guys off balance with the slider. He didn't have quite as many, strikeout numbers, right? But that's not everything, right? He had a lot of soft contact, a lot of just easy rollover ground balls on guys who were ahead of the slider and then behind a little bit on the fastball. In addition to that, he's got a changeup that is flashed a little bit here and there. I think he said himself, it's always been his third pitch. He really didn't have to throw it much in college. He was able to get away with mostly fastball slider, right? Now he's kind of incorporating that changeup more. So I saw a good amount of them yesterday, and it looked all right. It definitely is still kind of evolving as a third offering. But in general, Peppers was really good with the fastball slider and really settled in well throughout the rest of his start. So impressive stuff from Peppers, and a guy that, he clearly thinks about his pitching. It was cool to talk to him. I've talked to him once before. I think this was your first time talking to him, right?
Yeah.
And he's very thoughtful in the way he's going about things, and you can tell he's consistently trying to make improvements. And he may finish out the season in Kannapolis because he's kind of leading the pitching staff right now there with a bunch of other really young guys right now. But at the same time, I wouldn't be upset about seeing him in Winston at some point later this year as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Another guy on the pitching side of things, someone that most people within the White Sox fans and followers may not know this name. Carson Jacobs finished out the game yesterday, 2 innings at the end of the game in the 8th and 9th to close it down. This is a guy who was undrafted out of North Dakota State last year from the White Sox, kind of has been in the ACL pretty much, had a really strong season in the Arizona Complex League, and then got to Kannapolis about a few weeks ago. Now, since being in Kannapolis, 7 games with only 1 total run allowed out of the bullpen, a lot of strikeouts, 17 strikeouts across, I think it was 9 1/3 innings. So, I mean, he's filling up the stat sheet, gets up with the fastball, 97, 98 with the fastball he's topping at. But what was really interesting was the splitter of his. And this is a pitch that he noted after the game. He never threw much. And the White Sox have encouraged him in the past year to really emphasize the splitter and really start throwing it more and working with it more. He said himself, like, he doesn't necessarily know where it's going sometimes, but it moves really well. And it's got a funky kind of horizontal movement for a splitter compared to most splitters, where it has that drop, but it also has some horizontal break to it. Ian Eskridge, our video guy, thought it was a screwball at first and texted me about it. And then when I went back and watched the video, I was like, I think that could be too. I don't really know what that is. Carson said himself that catchers think it's a knuckleball sometimes because it has so much of this little sideways movement. It's just a splitter, which is fascinating to me. And I thought that pitch was his whole 2 innings he threw a few of those that I was like, whoa, that's a nice looking, break, whatever it is, right? That's a nice looking pitch.
Yeah, I saw him pitch multi-innings one other time, and it was the same results. I mean, he really dominated. And, when he came, the Ballers won 6-2 last night, but when he came into the game, it was 2-1, and he threw 2 shutout innings. So it was, high pressure, high leverage situation.
Yeah, no, he was good. He was really good. Just another name to keep an eye on as a bullpen guy who could potentially move pretty quickly with the stuff that he possesses. On the offensive side, we talked to a bunch of the draft picks before the game and then got a little bit of a taste. I think the one that stood out yesterday was TJ McCants, center fielder from Alabama, originally from Ole Miss. We talked a little bit about his connection with Tim Elko and Jacob Gonzalez and all these other Ole Miss guys in the White Sox organization, which was pretty cool to hear him kind of just excited to be in the same org with some guys that he was friends with, right? But at the same time, this is a guy who, he is really been impressive. His first game with the Ballers, he went deep. He has missed a few games with an injury. He was back in the lineup yesterday, plays a really nice center field, very athletic, experienced guy. He's an SEC, 5-year guy, right? So he's 23 years old and is the type of guy who, much like Tim Elko did, right? Like, this should be a guy that moves quickly. I think McCants next year could probably go straight to Winston. And from there, I think, we could see him in Birmingham next year as well. This is someone who, now he went deep yesterday, home run, in addition to some hits. He just has a lot of natural opposite field power, which is kind of interesting. I mean, both his homers so far have been to left field as a left-handed hitter, right? So opposite way. Good, solid speed, right? He got caught stealing yesterday, but generally speaking, some decent speed, knows how to play a good center field, and definitely has some pop in that bat and a swing that I think could really develop in the right direction.
Yeah, it was fun to talk to him. He's very friendly. It was a great opposite field home run that he hit last night. He looked really good at the plate right out of the gate, in his first week in Kannapolis in pro ball.
Yeah. Some other guys we talked to from the draft class, Lyle Miller Green from Austin Peavy is a 17th round pick of the White Sox this past year. This is a guy who's one of the more fascinating draft picks. Fifth year senior, right? So another guy that's older, big dude, and is someone who, hit, and he was a two-way player throughout college. Interesting note from him, he is playing a variety of first base and a little bit of outfield with the White Sox right now. Green's a guy, Miller, he's a guy that, has the arm strength to be an outfielder, right? But he doesn't quite have the athleticism, so we're going to see what it develops. He looks like more of a first baseman, DH guy long term, but a lot of power. Interesting note from him, he's throwing a bullpen in Kannapolis next week. This is a guy who was drafted as a two-way player, but I think the heavy expectation is he will be a hitter over a pitcher. Interesting to note that they're still going to let him mess around a little on the mound.
Yeah, he is a big guy, 6'5", 235. I'm kind of curious the results of the bullpen session, right?
Yeah, I'm curious to see. We'll have to check in with him once he gets that bullpen going. I mean, he's a guy that he hit. I think he was touching 97, 98 in college, so he's got the strength for sure. I just think he said himself he's always been a better hitter, and he likes doing both. But he knows he's a little bit better at the plate, so we'll see what happens with that. But great to check in with him. There were some other guys from this draft class we talked to. Nathan Archer as well, another outfielder from Bowling Green. This is a guy who was a mid-major school, right, but had a ton of college success. We didn't get to see him play yesterday, but we caught up with him. Definitely sounds like he's experienced, comfortable, and really just an all-around hitter. It seems like from talking to people there that he's done a good job in some at-bats so far, and I've seen a few of his at-bats on video. But this is someone who I think should have a chance to really progress in the right direction, and another guy that can play a good center field. And two experienced center fielders added to the mix is never a bad thing.
Go ahead. Yeah, absolutely. Another one of 5 hitters that came from college. So
plenty of guys. And then Jackson Appel, who's the catcher that was drafted in the 6th round by the White Sox out of Texas A&M. He played 4 years at Penn and then transferred to Texas A&M for his 5th year. So another 5th year guy, older guy. But I was saying this yesterday to someone in Kannapolis, right? Appel is a guy that it is never a bad idea to have a seriously experienced catcher in your farm system, no matter whether it's, in bullpens or during the game, whatever it is. He's a guy that, has continued to hit at the next level, right? He's been hitting well in his first few games that he's gotten. Right now, he's splitting duties catching in Kannapolis, so he's really not catching every day. He's probably catching 3 or 4 days a week. But this is a guy who, is got a ton of experience catching high-level college pitching at a D1 level, and is someone that's going to be a really good presence at the very least to work with these pitchers. And it sounds like he is doing a good job getting to know these pitchers. He seems like he's really determined to get comfortable and get to know all these pitchers down in Kannapolis.
Yeah, it's interesting. The other notable catcher in Kannapolis is Ronnie Hernandez, who's really come on of late. And I think you tweeted out that you now think he's the 2nd highest rated catcher in the Sox system, which is interesting because a year ago, we were talking about Calvin Harris, Michael Turner, and so there's a lot of depth in the system, and he's joins a pretty strong group.
Yeah, so Ronnie's a good guy to mention. There's a few other players, still new guys we want to mention as well, too, at some point. But Ronnie yesterday, 4 for 4, 3 doubles. 2 of those doubles were near home runs, right? So he could have had 2 homers yesterday, frankly, in a 4 for 4 game. Ronnie's 19 years old, Ronnie. I mean, he's a guy that he is an interesting player because I still think he's got some work to do behind the plate. He's a big dude. He's got a little bit more mobility that needs to come along as he catches. But, 19, catching in single A already and doing a pretty good job doing it. And the way he's been hitting lately, I tweeted the stat line. I don't have all of it pulled up right now, but he's been really good in the past month or two. He had some ups and downs to start the season. He still hasn't quite tapped into his power. But then again, yesterday, he was about 5 feet from hitting 2 different home runs. So, that's the type of thing where the power numbers don't always look visually appealing, but he's hitting the ball hard. And yesterday, his at-bats were really, really good. He was really getting the barrel of the ball. This is a guy who, 19 years old, right? He's 19 and he could be catching Winston next year, right? We might see him in Candy for a little more, but I think we're probably going to see him in Winston next year after a whole season in Candy this year. And, going into a season in high A as a 20-year-old catcher is great to see. And like Jeff pointed to, I don't think there's another catcher behind Caro in the system that is as exciting right now as Ronnie, and I don't even think it's that close. I think Ronnie is going to be, the next catcher that you're looking at as a true prospect catcher, right? He's going to make the Future Sox top 30 for the first time. We're going through our top 30 prospects, and he looks like he's going to make it this time. So, top 30 prospect in the system, and someone that we definitely have our eye on, and is one of the mainstays in this Canny lineup with a lot of other new guys who's been really good of late, especially the last month or two here in Kannapolis.
And he and Edgar are the only 2 catchers on the list, right?
I believe so. Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah. So,
Yeah, he had a great night yesterday and great game, and he was so fired up after the game. It was fun to catch up with him.
Definitely. One other guy that we want to mention from the 2024 crew, undrafted free agent Alec Makarowicz, I think. I'm not even going to try to get the name right. AMAC is what everybody calls him in Kannapolis. So really good to catch up with him, get to meet him a little bit and hear about his story. This is a guy who, another fifth-year guy, right, played undrafted out of college. But from what I heard, it sounds like a lot of people within the White Sox org thought this was a guy that was definitely going to get drafted. I think there was a lot of people very surprised he didn't get drafted. And it sounds to me like he said to us he got the call less than an hour after the draft ended to sign a free agent deal with the White Sox. So this is a guy that clearly, especially him going to Kannapolis with the very first group of draft picks, signals to me that this is a guy the White Sox see in a much higher light than a typical undrafted free agent, I think, and someone that I think they've got their eye on and are really keen on getting some at bats. I mean, he's hitting fourth right now in the lineup as a guy who was undrafted, right? So being an undrafted free agent and going straight to single A and then hitting fourth immediately, it clearly signals that this team believes in his offensive upside.
Yeah, it's I keep thinking about all these guys and what it's going to portend for the playoffs when you sprinkle in some of the other guys we're going to cover in just a second. It's a tough lineup top to bottom all of a sudden.
100%. One guy we want to touch on who we got to talk to after the game yesterday, and was someone that we both have always been fans of, but I think we saw some things from him yesterday defensively that were really interesting, and then we got to hear a little about his offensive game. Ryan Burroughs is someone who in my opinion is the very clear best defensive shortstop among the 3 or 4 shortstops that have played shortstop in Kannapolis. He was slick last night. He made some really nice plays with the glove. His arm is still kind of getting there, I think, in terms of the consistency of his throws, but really, really athletic at shortstop, really good with the glove. And this is a guy who's adjusted his swing a ton in the past, few months, Jeff, and looks more comfortable. The results haven't necessarily come yet, but it does sound to me like he's feeling better about his swing and he's in a better place with his offensive game than he was earlier in the year.
Yeah, he's a young guy, but I think we both came away really impressed with his understanding of his own swing and what he needed to do to improve it. And like I told him last night, he's looked like a different player the last month. And Pat Leland said pretty much the same thing, that he's not giving up at bats anymore. They're all competitive now.
Yeah, he really has changed a lot, and he adjusted his hands. You can go listen to that interview. I'm going to get that interview probably it'll be up by the time this podcast drops. But this is a guy who I think really has a lot more to tap into. I think there's a lot more power for him to kind of find, and I think he's someone that going into 2025, I think he might just stay in Kannapolis just because he's still very young and because there's a lot of shortstops in this pipeline right now. But at the same time, I think Burroughs is a guy that I have him circled as one of my 2025 breakout candidates, because I really do think there's a lot more in his game. Really athletic, really twitchy guy, and I think it's just going to come down to a little more consistency with his swing, and once he really finds that, we could see him blossom in this system.
Yeah, absolutely.
Joral Perez is another guy. Joral Perez was one of the key pieces in the Eric Fedde deal with the Dodgers a few weeks ago. Has only been in Kannapolis now for 2 weeks, so they're still getting to know him. But Pat Leland spoke really highly of him. It sounds like he's the type of guy who his offensive game is going to translate. He's got a lot of juice. He's got a lot of ability to find his pitches and hunt the pitches that he's best at hitting. He had a really nice hit late in the game yesterday, and just someone that it's still a lot of work to do with his swing and with his development. But 19 years old and has already flashed some real gap-to-gap power, ability to pull the ball well, and is someone that we think could be an impact infielder potentially moving forward.
Yeah, regardless what you think about the trade, he is an interesting piece, and he's a really strong-looking 6 foot, 180 pounds. I got to tell you, that's 180 pounds of muscle.
Yeah, he's a big dude. He definitely has some power. We're going to hopefully get to check in with him a little bit in the next few days here. But, that's someone who is definitely interesting. And that brings us to the youngest player of all these players we mentioned that are young and developing. The youngest is still George Walco. George Walco is a guy that, 18 years old now, was drafted last year at 17. We've talked about him plenty on this podcast, so I hope that everybody knows the name by now. Downers Grove High School, Illinois guy, right? This is the thing that stands out to me every time I talk to George, and we've talked to him a handful of times. I've got to know him over the past year, just hearing about his game and how he's developing. This guy doesn't sound 18. He doesn't sound 21. His maturity and ability to understand his own game and development is at the level of players that are in the big leagues right now, frankly. I really don't think that's too out there to say. He is extremely advanced as just a mental baseball player for an 18-year-old, right? On top of the fact that we've seen flashes of, the best offensive upside in this entire farm system, right? Like there's a lot of work to be done and he knows that. But at the same time, this is a guy who has the upside to be one of, if not the best potential hitter in this entire organization in terms of the prospects, right?
Yeah, I mean, no one has a higher ceiling for sure. And boy, if you came away from that conversation yesterday, he's very mature and he's very driven.
Yeah.
He was going to work himself.
He's determined. One thing Pat Leland mentioned to us before the game, was kind of interesting. Pat said, we have to remind George like he's doing good, and we have to tell him he's making progress because he doesn't want to see himself making progress because he has such high standards for himself. And George himself reiterated the same thing later. Jeff asked him about, if he thinks he's made enough progress, and he said, nope, never satisfied, a lot more work to do. And like that was, he was I knew it was coming. I knew exactly what he was about to say. But it's like this is a guy who is going to keep working and wants to be the absolute best. There is zero lack of like drive. And all these guys are super driven, but George Walko for his age is incredibly driven and, has really made a lot of strides. I think one of the things I took away, aside from the offensive game, right? One of the things I took away from him yesterday was talking about his defense and how he has been able to, partly from working with some of the Mike Daniel, one of the defensive coordinators for the White Sox. And then, some of these older college outfielders, he's really figuring out how to be an outfielder and how to be a balanced outfielder who doesn't necessarily do things too aggressively, takes his time, makes the right throws, cuts guys off, throws to the cutoff man, and his arm is an arm. We saw it yesterday. There was a throw to home on the runner who held up at third, but because George made a throw home, that was, on a bullet to Ronnie Hernandez
on the fly.
There's some throws you see where you're like this, and he's not. I think he sticks in a corner likely. I mean, he's played some center field, but realistically, at his size, he's going to be a corner outfielder. But right field is a spot where you want your best arm, and George Walko definitely has the arm to stick in right field. It's a powerful arm. He's athletic. He's sneaky fast for his size too. That's one thing that I always take away from watching games of his is like he has some speed for a dude that's 6'7" and probably 240, 250, right? Like he moves. He can definitely move out there, the outfield and on the bases as well. It's the approach too. That was something we harped on. Dan Haloti, who does a great job with broadcasting in Kannapolis, kind of asked George to elaborate a little more on his approach. And it sounds like he's really, really worked on and honing in on developing, taking pitches and understanding that getting on base is getting on base. And his walk rate has jumped a bunch in the past month or two since he got to Kannapolis. He's generally doing a better job. I think he understands, like, one of the things he noted too was like pitchers don't want to pitch to him. He's a huge dude. Everybody, he's well known generally in terms of prospects, right? Like, and he dealt with this his whole life. Like he knows that. And I think he's aware of that, right? So he's prepared to go into things and know that guys don't want to throw to him. And that's something he just has to deal with, right? He's going to get a lot of breaking balls compared to some other hitters. He's going to get a lot of junk outside the zone that he's going to have to learn how to lay off. And he's already doing a better job. And the fact that we're seeing, it's not perfect, right? He's still chasing some breaking balls for sure. But the fact that we're seeing him start to hone in on that approach and start to be a little more patient, 3 months into his single A career is already a huge sign for the future.
Yeah. And I think I told you, I'd seen his 2 home run game. And in both those situations, he knew fastballs were coming. One was a 3-2 count. One was a 3-0 count. And when he knows a fastball's coming, he'll kill it.
Yeah, and the breaking ball recognition and ability to hit and adjust to it is going to get better.
Yeah.
Like we said, the fastball, he knows how to crush fastballs for sure. If he's got a fastball coming, he's going to get into it and he's going to drive it far. And it's more than just the home runs, right? Like he's not just a home run hitter. I think it's easy to look at the numbers and look at the size and think he's just, this is a power or nothing guy. And at times he has been this year. He's hitting the ball hard no matter what. Even when he's hitting balls on the ground, they're going hard. And even when he's trying to line drives into the gaps, they're getting hit really hard. So he's going to hit the ball hard. It's just going to continue to be a process of making more contact, developing his pitch recognition, and adjusting better to those breaking balls that he's going to be getting. He's going to get more breaking balls than the average hitter throughout his entire career. That's just going to be the type of guy he is because of his stature and because of his power. So that's something he's going to have to deal with, and he knows that.
Yeah, with regard to him hitting the breaking pitches, he had no chance when he first started the season. Now he's fouling them off. He looks better. He's almost on those breaking pitches. Yeah. It's huge progress.
And you're still going to see a really high strikeout rate. Like I know people look at the numbers, and that's the initial thing is you look at the numbers and you think, this guy's striking out way too much. Yes, right? Like he knows that. He's aware of that. That's a given, right? Like the strikeout numbers are high, but that doesn't mean there's not progress being made there. And that's something that I think you need to go deeper than the stat sheet to see that sometimes. And it's really the reality with him, and everybody you talk to in the White Sox organization realizes just how much offensive upside this guy has. And even if it's not quite there yet, it's going to get there, and he's making progress in the right direction.
So, Elijah, let's stop for a second and think about the lineup we saw last night and what it means for the next couple of weeks. We saw Ryan Burroughs, TJ McCants in front of George Wolkow, and Alec Markowitz, AMAC, hitting behind him. Gerald Perez fifth, and one of the hottest hitters on the team, Ronnie Hernandez, sixth. They had Arxie Hernandez, who they really like, at seventh. Drake Logan, an experienced outfielder, at eighth, and Sam Unatachi at ninth. And still guys on the bench like Lyle Miller Green and Nathan Archer.
I was going to say, you got two other college guys that are very experienced bats that weren't even playing last night, and Jackson Appel too, the catcher from the recent draft pick. So this is a deep team. There's almost too many players for at bats, right? But at the end of the day, like heading into the playoff time, like this is a roster that has a lot of talent up and down. I think the pitching is going to be the more interesting thing to follow because, so as we kind of gear up for the pitching, right? We talked about the two guys that we were impressed with yesterday. Ricardo Brizuela is someone who I want to mention as well because really high praise from Pat Leland on him, and he's been excellent. I don't think people realize just how good he's been since coming up to Kannapolis. He had a really rough first game and first inning. Really, he gave up, I think, 6 or 7 runs his first inning in Kannapolis, and since then has been lights out. He has not allowed anything really in his past 4 or 5 starts now in Kannapolis, and has settled in really well to a role behind Jake Peppers as a guy who could potentially start a playoff game for Kannapolis, considering how good he's been lately. So that's another guy that I think we are definitely keeping our eye on. We're going to see him tomorrow. We record this on Friday, and we're going to see him on Saturday in Kannapolis. So I'm really excited to get my first in-person look at him because he's not a guy that blows people away, but he's just really tactical and locates really well, and is someone who I think we also have an eye on the pitching side in Canny as well.
Yeah, that should be a fun game. And then the fourth guy in the rotation is Tanner McDougal, who was sent from Winston-Salem back to Kannapolis. But, like we talked about yesterday, he's a young guy. He's got great stuff. Maybe he's just got pushed a little too quickly.
Yeah, it sounded like he just needed a reset. I mean, that's what Pat said. It was like he just kind of needed to reset and get himself back in a better place. McDougal's got some of the best stuff you'll ever see at the single A level, right? Like his stuff is really, really good. He just needs to hone it a little more, get a little more command consistency. So it's up and down for a guy like McDougal, but in general, I think he's someone that we still see as a really plus arm. I'm not sure if it's going to be as a starter. Ultimately, because he's in his his third full professional season now, he is still young, still 21, so we could see it continue to develop as a starter. But I do see the possibility to move him into a bullpen role eventually, where he could dominate given the stuff that he possesses.
And Elijah, we buried the lead here today because there's one more pitcher that we may see in Kannapolis, right?
That's a good point. We are still looming the Hagen Smith decision. So that's a good thing to bring up. Hagen Smith, 5th overall pick in this past draft a month ago. This is a guy who, we've talked about him before. Like he could go to Birmingham tomorrow and probably succeed. With that said, I think he has thrown in Arizona. So we've heard that he's thrown in the Bridge League scrimmage games in Arizona. I don't think the White Sox are going to push him too much, considering he has so many innings under his belt from this college season. I wouldn't be shocked to see him in a playoff game potentially for Kannapolis, get him that high energy, really give him an opportunity to be in that big situation, or potentially he goes straight to Winston just for 2 regular season starts there to finish out his year maybe. I don't know what the plan is for him. It's been pretty hush-hush around what the plan is for Hagen. It'd be great to see him either in Canny or Winston, at least for a few games here down the stretch.
Yeah, and the Sox have said they want to get his feet wet a little bit in pro ball this year. So the only question is where. But fingers crossed it's Kannapolis or Winston-Salem, because I can't wait to see it.
And there's a lot of other guys coming too in terms of bullpen guys, other pitchers to keep an eye on, right? So you've got Phil Fox, you've got Pierce George, Blake Shepardson, a bunch of other guys. In addition to that, Justin Sinibaldi, Mason Moore. There's a lot of these college arms within this draft class that are still gonna get a chance at some point here in the end of the season, whether it's Canny or maybe even some go to Winston potentially. But there's more arms on the way as well. We've already got a bunch of hitters here. There's probably some more hitters too. Nick McLean's a guy who is working to get himself back into game shape, 3rd round pick this year. He should be going to Canny or Winston at some point down the stretch here. So there's even more talent coming up from Arizona still from this draft class. But at the end of the day, this Canny roster is in a really good spot. And it was really cool to spend an entire day there just talking to all these different players and seeing, this next wave of talent that's now entering the White Sox system.
So Elijah, so far this week in 3 days, 3 games, 2 batting practices, probably 15 player interviews.
Yeah, something like that.
And now the pace is going to pick up a little bit, as crazy as that sounds, because today we're going to go to batting practice in Charlotte, a game in Charlotte. Tomorrow we're going to see a noon game in Charlotte and a 7 p.m. game in Kannapolis. So a really intense 36 hours coming up, but I know we're both pretty fired up about it.
Yeah, this should be good. We will have these episodes, we're just focused on Charlotte, and then today was Kannapolis. We'll talk even more about these next 2 days of games the next time we record, which is a little bit TBD on the date, but we will record sometime soon again, and we'll have even more information coming from the White Sox farm system. This has been a great trip to get to hang out with Jeff and just experience everything going down in Charlotte and Kannapolis. The highest level of affiliated ball for the White Sox, the lowest level of affiliated ball. Really interesting to see the contrast and just all these different players. It's a good group of players. At the end of the day, winning, it doesn't necessarily equal winning, but it's awesome to see this level of cohesion and energy and positivity throughout the farm system right now.
Yeah. Time to roll.
That's all we got. All right. We'll be back next time for another edition of the Future Sox Roundup.